Let's go to Joshua chapter 4. I did Joshua chapter 3 the last service, so feel free to listen to it on the app afterwards if you want. We know you all will. You're looking forward to it. But since it's, Memorial Day weekend, we're called to remember some things. We're called to reflect. We're called to remember, we're called to reflect, and obviously as a nation, Memorial Day weekend, we want to remember, those who, gave their lives so we can survive in a free country still, even though those freedoms are being taken little by little. And I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through this message. But we're called to remember and we're called to reflect. Now, what do I need to do, guys? I told you, these things aren't the greatest for me because my ears are a little bit large. So, all right. Is that working? Okay, all right. I don't know. At least I grew into them a little bit. When I was little, they were real out there, So we're called to remember. We're called to reflect. And in the case in Joshua chapter 3 and chapter 4, we'll be in chapter 4 in just a second. Remember, they had just crossed over Jordan as you get into chapter 4. In chapter 3, they're called to wait at the side of the brink of Jordan, and God was going to take them through the Jordan River. Now remember, the Jordan River is in flood season. The children of Israel had just wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and they're wandering. 40 years has come to an end. God's going to take them over the Jordan River in flood season. It's about 900 feet wide, 100 feet deep at this time, and it's flowing. God tells the priest to take the Ark of the Covenant to go stand out in front of the people. All the people are waiting on the bank of Jordan for about 3,000 feet back so they can see the Ark. They're waiting there for 3 days. They're remembering. They're reflecting on what God did in the past with the Red Sea, on what happened in the wilderness wanderings as they were rebellious and God had to basically let a lot of them fall and die in the wilderness and take the next generation into the promised land. They're remembering, they're reflecting on all these things as they're sitting there for 3 days. And then Joshua tells the priests, when God tells you to go, go, and you're going to go stand in the midst of the Jordan River. You're going to step in, you're going to step out by faith, and God's going to do a miracle. God's going to do something special. So the priests get up, they start to move forward, they start to go. They have the Ark of the Covenant on their backs, on staves. Now remember, the Ark wasn't probably covered. It was always covered. At this time, I believe it's uncovered. People are seeing the brightness of the cherubims that are on the box. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. We think in terms of movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark. I know that's an 80s movie, but I'm sure you all probably saw it. It's a box. The Ten Commandments were held in there. God's presence supposedly sat on that box. Not supposedly, it did, but you couldn't see him because he's an invisible God. But what happened was they kept that box in the back of the Holy of Holies in a tent, in a tabernacle. Nobody could go back there but the high priest once a year. So when God's presence would move, they would pack up the tent. They would cover the ark with these badger skins so nobody could see it because he was holy. He was separated. That's what the whole sacrificial system was set up for. You cannot approach a holy God. You need a sacrifice. We know Jesus is our sacrifice. But on this day, God says, I want everybody to see the ark. Take the badger skins off. Have the priests go stand up. I'm doing a new work. I'm doing a new thing. The people start to move because they see the priests move. They're holding the ark. God tells the priests, just step into the water. But we might go down. We might drown. We don't want to drop this holy article of furniture. No, they step in. God makes the river go up, hold back as a heap. Everybody gets to see this. The priests are standing in the midst of Jordan. The river's a heap. Everybody goes across. God makes the wet soil on the ground in the river dry. They go across on dry ground. A miracle happens. A couple million people. It must have took all day. And then God tells them to do something pretty special in chapter 4. He's going to have them set up stones of remembrance. Because God held back the river in flood season so the people could go across on dry ground into the promised land. Some of you are in a flood season right now. That's when God does his best works. He will come through. He will deliver. You got to stand still like the priest. You got to look to Jesus. He will come through. But God's going to have him set up these stones, these memorial stones, to remember something. And the stones are going to symbolize something. He's going to have them set up these stones so when people see the stones, they're to reflect. They're to remember. Because we're supposed to listen as Christians. We're supposed to take our faith. We're supposed to pass it to the next generation. Psalm 145:4 talks about this. We're to take our faith and we're to pass it to the next generation. And we need memorials sometimes to remember and to reflect on things. Now listen, I'll give you another movie. You ever see the movie Saving Private Ryan? See, my kids, they're getting like I forced them to watch this stuff. I do, as they were growing up. Now, you ask some kids today, you see the movie Saving Private Ryan? What's that? Because it was like 23 years ago. You don't realize how old you're getting, right? But remember in the movie, you see Private Ryan at the end. He's an old man, and he's going to the memorial stone. He's going to the memorial stone, to the tombstone of his platoon leader who gave his life to take this whole crew of guys in to World War II to save him because all his brothers got killed in the war and they didn't want the mother to have no surviving son, so they sent this crew in just to save him. And if you remember at the end of the movie, remember what happens? As the tank's bearing down on him over the bridge, was Tom Hanks. He's sitting there and he's shooting at the tank. And he's already shot several times. And then Private Ryan, who's Matt Damon, goes up to him, and he's like, and he doesn't know what to do. But just then the Americans come in and they wipe out the bridge, and everything is good. They're saved. Private Ryan lives. He's able to make it back to his mother. Remember what he does as Tom Hanks is dying. He's dying. All he wanted to do was go back and see his wife. That's all he told his guys. Remember, they had a bet going on what he did for a living. He wouldn't tell them he was a school teacher because they would think less of him, right? And all he cared about was doing whatever he had to do to fulfill his duty so he can get back and see his wife. But he couldn't go back and see his wife because he had to give his life to save Private Ryan. And at the end of the movie, he's sitting there, and Private Ryan, who's Matt Damon, looking at him, he's looking at him, and he looks at him, and he says one thing to him. He says, earn this. Earn this. I'm going to die, but I died to save you. I died to save you. And remember, as the movie ends, it goes back to the cemetery where Private Ryan's older now, and is a memorial stone. He's remembering what was done for him. Listen, because we need to remember. You know, every time we do communion, that's what Jesus says. Remember what I did for you. Remember this, how much I love you, that I gave my life for you. Because God's going to tell them over and over again. If you read the book of Deuteronomy 4, Deuteronomy 6, Deuteronomy 8, over and over again, you know what he says? When you go into that promised land, don't forget. When you go into the promised land, I'm taking you into a land where there's cisterns, there's wells that you didn't dig. There's going to be coconut trees. It's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey that you did not plant. Everything's going to be blessed. He goes, when you go into that land and I give you that promised land, he goes, don't forget. He goes, when you go into that promised land in Deuteronomy chapter 6, you remember what he says? He goes, and you teach these things to the next generation. Don't forget. I need you to remember. I say this all the time. My job as a pastor, you know what it is? If you've been a Christian for a year, 2, 5, or 10, you know some stuff. But you often don't live it sometimes because not that you forgot it. It's like willful forgetfulness. And you need to remember, you need to be reminded on what God has done for you. Then God tells the children of Israel, you're supposed to pass your faith on to the next generation. He's going to have them set up these memorial stones, and you're going to see as we read through it, because he wants them to remember something. Where he brought them from, what they took them out of. And we're supposed to pass our faith on to the next generation. Let's look what it says, chapter 4, verse 1. And it came to pass, when all the people were clean passed over Jordan, that the Lord spake unto Joshua. Listen, they're clean passed over. They didn't have mud on their feet. They were clean. They all made it over Jordan. The priest stood still. A miracle happened. The river Jordan in flood season heaped up. They all go across. They're in the promised land. God has done a new thing in their life. And the Lord speaks to Joshua. And look what happens. He says, Joshua tells them, saying, take you 12 men out of the people, out of every tribe of man, for the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? A couple million people make up all these tribes, that they were all from a tribe, the 12 tribes of Israel. And it says, and command you them, saying, take you hence out of the midst of Jordan, out of the place where the priest's foot stood firm, 12 stones, and you shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you shall lodge this night. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had prepared out of the children of Israel, out of every tribe a man. So you get the picture. A couple million people. God says, just get me 12. Get me one man that's well known from each tribe. Just one. Because each man's going to represent that whole tribe of a couple million people. Get me one man that's well known from each tribe, and I got a job for them. This is what they're going to do. And Joshua said unto them, verse 5, pass over before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of Jordan, and take you up every man of you a stone upon his shoulder, according unto the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you, a sign, a memorial, that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what mean you these stones? What do these stones mean? Then you shall answer them that the waters of Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be for a memorial unto the children of Israel forever. Do you get the point? You get the picture? Everybody's across. Joshua says, hold on. We're not going to Jericho just yet. Have everybody stay encamped on the side of Jordan. On the opposite side. They already went across. Get a well-known man from each tribe. Have them go back in the river and get 12 stones. But they don't only get 12 stones. They get 24 stones. You're going to see that in a minute. Have them get these stones, take them out of the river, and they weren't just little pebbles, they were boulders. And lug them. Because your kids are going to ask you one day what those stones mean. Your kids are going to be playing on the bank of the Jordan River in the future, and they're going to say, it looks like somebody put these stones together. It doesn't look like they were just laying around. It looks like somebody heaped them up in a certain way. Did somebody put this pile of stones together, Dad? What is this? You know, we're still trying to figure out what stones mean. You know that, right? Stonehenge, right? Well, how'd those things get there? What happened? What was going on? You know, this is the weird stuff I do. I study these things. I want to know what it was like before the flood. I want to know what it was like right after the flood. Do you know why I want to know? Do you know why I'm intrigued? Because there's massive stones all over the planet that are piled in certain ways on top of one another. And we still don't have equipment with all our technology today to be able to move them. So what were they doing back then? But we're told in the school systems that, you know, people were stupid back then, a bunch of cavemen walking around, oof, boom, bang, bang. You look like girl, bang, by the hair, you come mate with me. That's what we're told. No. I think they were smarter back then. But I want to know what all these stone formations were. What were they doing back then? How'd they put these stones together in the pilgrimage? That's easy. 1 million slaves put them together. Maybe. But you know the angles that are in the pyramids? The 90-degree angles, we can't match those angles today with our modern technology. It's amazing what was going on back then. Now, I think there's a reason. That's mankind putting stones together to try to, pass on whatever was going on back then to the next generation. I think God doesn't want us to know what those stones mean. Because I think they were worshiping false gods and there was demonic activity going on back then. I think we'll see that again as the days draw near, as it was in the days of Noah. I think we'll see it again. But these stones, these memorials, in Joshua's day, meant something. Meant something. And kids ask questions. Hey, what's this all about? What does this mean? What's that? Kids ask questions all the time. And it's like, oh, my goodness, another question? Right? I got a bunch of kids. Right? And they ask questions. I didn't have the best father figures growing up, just to be honest with you. But I had a little bit of a father figure for a little while. It was my mother's boyfriend. I won't tell you his name. But I can remember asking him questions. Because little boys want to ask dads or father figures questions. And I can remember a couple times he answered the questions, and a couple times he said, "Get away from me, you bother me, kid." All right? But the point is, kids ask questions. And I did the best I could as my kids are growing up, and they're still growing up. They ask questions, they ask questions, they ask questions. Once they become teenagers, they don't ask any more questions because they know everything. They don't have any more questions. We know everything. Got it all figured out. The only question I hear now is, can I have? Can I have? Can I have? That's the only one. Can you get? Can I have? All right. Some of you know what I'm talking about. So God says, don't go. We're not taking on Jericho yet. We're not going into battle yet. We're not taking the promised land yet. I need you to perform this little ceremony. I need you to do this. Get one man from each tribe, a well-known man that everybody knows, and you send them back into the river that you just came out of. Grab 12 stones, big ones, and then grab 12 more. Verse 8. And the children of Israel did so as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones out of the midst of Jordan, as the Lord spake unto Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. And they carried them over with them unto the place where they lodged, and they laid them down there. So they laid down 12 stones at the place that they lodged on the bank of the Jordan that they just crossed over. And, verse 9, now watch this. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the river. You got 12 on the bank, big stones piled up. Each stone represents the people of God, the 12 tribes of Israel. You got 12 on the bank, and then you got 12 more in the river somewhere. And Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests which bear the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there until this day. I'll guarantee you, till that day when this was written, but I guarantee you in that river somewhere in Jordan, they're still there. Because God said they're there. Now listen to me. What's the purpose of these 12 stones? What's the purpose of this memorial? You're supposed to see the stones. You're supposed to remember. You're supposed to reflect. Memorial Day, remember, reflect. That we get to live somewhere. And the place we get to live, some people died for. So remember that. Tom Hanks to Matt Damon at the end of the movie, you get to survive because I died. So make your life count for something. Earn this, he tells him. Remember that. Don't forget. Now I'm going to tell you there's something special about these stones. Something different about these stones. Yeah, they were just rocks of granite. Just stones that God made. But the memorial behind them is meaningful. Very meaningful. Why 12 stones on the bank of Jordan, and then why 12 stones in the Jordan? Why 12 stones over here and 12 stones over there? Because when the Jordan River started to flow again, I'm sure little by little in time, the stones are going to be covered up. The stones are going to be covered over. There's going to be mud all over them. I know they're still there because God said they're still there, right? They're still there. And then the waters are going to start running. The water's going to start going. 12 stones in the river, 12 stones on the bank of the river. Why 2 sets of stones? You know why? Because the memorial of the stones is this, that God was there for the previous generation. That's the stones in the river. And God's going to be there for the current generation. That's the stones that are on the bank. That God is your source in the past, and God's your source in the future. That God was there for you, He is there for you, and He's going to be there for you. It's not that God was there for me. Those are the stones in the river for the past generation. No, God is there for me now, and God's going to be there for me in the future. He's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You know what that means? When God appeared to Moses, right? Remember what He says? He didn't say, hey, Moses, how's it going down there shepherding those sheep? Thought you were a big shot when you were back in Egypt, huh? But I made you nothing. You're a little shepherd boy, a nobody for 40 years. He doesn't tell him that. He appears to Moses out of the burning bush. Remember what he says? He says, hey, I'm the God of Abraham. I'm the God of Isaac. I'm the God of Jacob. Those guys that lived 400 years ago. But you know what God doesn't say? God doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham, I was the God of Isaac, and I was the God of Jacob. God said, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am the God of Jacob. You know what He was telling them? Those guys aren't dead. I'm their God right now. I was their God then in the past, and I'm their God now because they're with me. And Moses, by the way, I'm your God. And I've been watching you down there getting aggravated with those sheep. Yep. That was an amen. But now I'm going to do something. He tells Moses, now I'm going to use you. Memorials. Do we have memorials in our life? Can we look back, right? Can we look back? God, you did this in my life back then. You were my God then. You're my God now. You're the God of the past generation. You're the God of the future generation. Now listen to me. God is your source. That's what the stones represent. That's what the memorial represents. When you see the stones, remember, God did that miracle in flood season. When you see those stones, remember, God took a whole nation of people, a couple of million of them, and He stopped the river as a heap in flood season. It was 100 feet deep, 900 feet wide, and it was flowing, and these priests stood in it. You know what? And God was the source. He took care of them. He provided for them. He got them across on dry ground. Not one of them got muddy. All right, everybody's got to clap or it's weird. All right? When somebody starts clapping, either clap or no clap. You can't have it in the middle. Yeah. All right? So I recommend the no clap. We can save our claps because then one person might start. Then we'll have 57 claps. Can't have that. All right? Can't have claps. And don't clap for me, clap for Jesus because He's our source. Now listen. He's our source in the past to the previous generation. He's our source in the future. Those 12 stones says, hey, I was with that generation. Yeah, they were rebellious. Yeah, they didn't listen to me. But I still took care of them. And I'm going to be with the next generation. I want to say this to you. You know what the stones are supposed to represent? When those children come to the bank of the river and they see those stones and they say, Dad, what do these stones represent? What does it mean? Who piled them up here? The dad's supposed to stop and pause for 10 minutes and say, hey, you know something? Let me tell you what God did. Let me tell you what God did for Dad and Grandpa as He took them through the Red Sea and took care of them in the wilderness. But they didn't listen. But God still blessed them. Let me tell you what God did for them. And by the way, son, there's stones in the river that represent them. Where are they? Where are they? Well, they're covered up now. But you know what? We have these stones outside on the bank of the river. And those stones are for you, son. So you can realize that just like God worked in their life, taking them across the Red Sea and taking us across Jordan, that God's going to be there for you in your life. I want to say this to you. Now, this is where you really got to pay attention. The problem in America is not the problem with the liberals. It's not the problem with the greedy conservatives, because a lot of them are. Yes, I know that. No, what are you a Democrat, Pastor Matt? No. But I don't care. Listen, I don't care. The problem is there's a transfer problem. That's the problem we have in America. There's a transfer problem. There's a transfer problem of our faith. There's a transfer problem of the things of God. The problem isn't, look what they do, look what they did, look what they're doing now. And the answer is not activism, by the way. So we're supposed to just sit back and do nothing? No, go ahead and do something. Do it right. Do it right. But that's not going to solve anything for the long haul. You know that, right? It's not activism. Let's rise up. Let's fight back. You do some of that. Do it godly. Do it in a humble way. But you know that ain't going to change it for a long time. How many generations does it take to lose a whole generation of people in the next generation? It only takes one. It only takes one to screw up a whole country. How do I know that? Read the book of Judges. You know what happened? In the book of Judges, one generation didn't transfer their faith to the next generation. You know what happened to the next generation? Everybody just did what they thought was right in their own eyes. And that's what we see. The problem that's going on in our nation and the problem in the Christian church, there's a transfer problem. No one transferred their faith. That's what happened. That's what's happening. And that's what God doesn't want to happen here. God was our source in the past for that generation. God's our source in the future for the next generation. But you know what Christians do? They do. Oh, my walk with God, I'm so thankful for what he's done in my life. And, this is what we do. This is what goes on in my life. But I don't want my kids to have it hard. I got to make sure everything is cushy. Everything is like this. Everything is okay for them. I don't want them to have the struggles that I had. And you know what? Sometimes you got to kick them out. You got to let them figure it out. They got to figure out their own walk with Jesus Christ. Everybody, not just half. Or else it's weird. Again, believe me, not clapping for me. We're clapping for Jesus, all right? Please. The problem is a transfer problem. The stones represent that God was their source in the past. God will be their source with the stones on the bank for the future. God's trying to prevent a transfer of faith problem. When the kids are walking by the Jordan, when they're going fishing, all the parents are supposed to tell them, or the people are starting to grow up in the promised land, and they see the stones, all the parents are supposed to tell them, hey, what does this mean? What does this mean? Let me tell you what God did for us. Let me tell you where we failed. Let me tell you what these stones mean for you, that God is your God now, and he'll do greater things in your life if you let him. God's trying to prevent a transfer problem. We have a transfer problem. How? Again, I don't blame Biden. I don't blame liberals. I don't blame borders. I don't blame all those things. Wherever you fall in that stuff politically, whatever. I don't blame any of that stuff. I always blame the church. Why do you do that, Pastor Man? That's not right. Yeah, it is. The problem's always with God's people. Always. Because God always wants to move. And how does he move? He moves through his people. But when his people say, I don't want to, I'm not gonna do that, God. I don't want my kids to have to go through this. You know what if you keep reading through Joshua, when they started to take the promised land, right? After they go in, they take Jericho. You know the story. Then they get beat up at Ai, and then they repent, and then they keep going. You know what a couple of the tribes did? A couple of the tribes said, hey, you know what? We like it on the other side of Jordan. It's just as fertile as that side of Jordan. We'll stay over here. We'll stay over here. And Joshua goes, what are you doing? Why do you want to do that? Well, financially and safety-wise, it's a little safer over here. It's just as fertile as that side of Jordan because it's real close to the bank. But Joshua said, but this is the promised land God gave us. Why do you want to stay over there? And they go, well, we don't want to go into battle in our kids. Our kids. That's what they said. And you know what? Joshua was wise. You know what he said? This is what he said. He goes, you can leave your wife and your kids over there if you want, but you men are going to war. That's what he told them. That's what he told them. But you know what the problem with that is? Here's the problem. You know what the problem with that is? The problem with that is this. Hear me. That all the other 10 tribes that went over with their kids and with their wives, their kids got to see the battle. Their wives got to see the battle. They got to see God work. They got to see God come true. All the kids that were cushy over here on that side of Jordan didn't get to see any of it. And that's what Christians do today. Oh, you know what? I'll bring them to church. I'll get them involved a little bit. But you know what? I want them to really live like the world. It's about your education. It's about how much money you can make. Yeah, we'll get saved on Sunday, but we'll live for everything needs to be cushy and live like the rest of the Americans. Absolutely not. And then we wonder why our faith doesn't get transferred. Hallelujah. That's why. Hallelujah. Let's keep them safe on this side of Jordan. They ain't safe. Kids got to see mom and dad struggle a little bit. Kids got to see their walk of faith. Kids got to see, do my parents really trust in God or do they not? They really know God? Do they not? You know what I love when we go to some of these conferences? And I take my sons with me. You know what they see? We go to some of these conferences, you know what they see? You know what I get? They're like, oh, Dad, these speakers are good, but what, you're pretty, God really does use you, I guess. You're a pretty good speaker. They actually get to see something like God, because they're just so familiar. So I thank you guys. Thank you. Not out of pride, but because I want them to see, because they're so familiar. I want them to see the work of God. I don't want to just leave them over there on that side of Jordan. See, the problem that God's trying to prevent here is what? The stones represent that God's your source in the past. That's the stones in the river. The stones represent on the bank. God's your source for the next generation. And God's trying to prevent a transfer problem. A transfer problem. Only takes one messed up generation to destroy a nation. Just one. Just one. What are we doing to prevent that transfer problem in our lives? What are we doing? What are we doing to prevent that transfer problem in our life? What memorials do you have in your life? What memorials do you have? What stones are you setting up in your life that you're passing on to the next generation? How God did this and how God did that in your life, and you want them to God to do greater things in their lives. What memorials do you have? It doesn't have to be a stone. It doesn't have to be a rock. It doesn't have to be your cross in your pocket. It should be your life. Your life. Because that's what matters. Well, I'll tell them about Jesus. Yeah, that's a memorial. That's good. Talk ain't enough. Enough. Talk only goes so far. You know what the Bible says? But you now are living stones, not written on tables of stone, but on the fleshly tablets of your heart. Jesus in your heart, in your life. You're living stones, and you're able to offer up spiritual praises, and you're a holy priesthood, Peter tells us in 1 Peter chapter 2. You're living stones. You're alive. That's what you pass on. Well, I'll teach them the doctrines. Yes, you should. That's this, though. A lot of churches just turn into this, I want that. I want just this. I can get that on YouTube. Just play a sermon. Why doesn't everybody come and we'll just play Pastor Matt or some other pastor? We'll just play this up there. I don't want that. I don't want this. I don't want just talk. You're living stones. Your life is a memorial. That's what it needs to be. People need to see Jesus in you. Listen, remember Jesus said, he goes, all these works that I'm doing, I do in my Father's name. You know what he said? He says, in greater works than these shall you do, because I go to the Father. So when it says in the book of Acts, we follow the apostles' doctrine, you know what that means? It doesn't just mean that churches carry, we follow a set of certain teachings. That's only part of it. But what was the apostles' doctrine? It was their talking and it was their life, their lives. That people saw Jesus and they saw a difference in them. They were living memorials. They were walking with Jesus. They walked with Jesus. That's what people saw. That's the apostles' doctrine. When I hear churches say, we follow the historic Christian faith. We follow the historic Christian faith in our doctrinal statement. So what? That's only part of it. You know how many dead churches are out there that you can read that they're following the historic Christian faith? You know why they die? Because they just got written on tables of stone and not of the heart. What memorials do you have in your life that the next generation can see? That we can pass on to the next generation? God's trying to prevent a transfer problem here with these memorials, with these stones. Tell your kids what God did in my life then. And tell your kids what God can do in their life in the future. Listen, you know my testimony. We told our kids when we were growing up, me and Larissa, we didn't do the right thing. I knew Jesus, she didn't. I walked away from the Lord. She got pregnant twice. She had 2 abortions. I knew it was happening. I knew it was right. She was deceived. Her whole family was telling her this and that and everything else. Telling her, oh, that's not this, that, not that. The doctors say this, the doctor said. I knew it was happening. And you know what? She came to Jesus. And she knew that we had 2 kids in heaven. That's why we don't think that we're better than anybody. I don't think that we're better than the homosexuals and the trans people. We're just as bad as they are. We're just as bad as they are. But you know what? I passed on my faith to the next generation. This is what we were. This is what we were. But you know what? This is what we are now in Jesus. Everything that God's done in my life is because of Jesus. People say, well, how can you say that? How can you tell people that? Because listen, Jesus is a forgiving God. He's a loving God. He loves us. He forgives us. And all those things help me never forget what we came from and what we've done. That I'm no better than anybody. The only thing that's good in me is Jesus. I want my life to be a living memorial for Jesus. Not just a fake one. Not just talk. That's what those stones represented. That God was the God of that generation, and God's going to be the God of this generation. But we got to pass that faith on to the next generation. You know what my prayer is to God about this, the property we own and the church people here and the stuff that God is doing? This is always my prayer to God. God, please don't ever let this place and these people get to a place where the next generation takes over and then they're watering down the Word of God and they're not teaching it here anymore and that still has the name of a church and, oh, that church used to be this and it used to be that and now, you know, they're selling off property over there and they're doing that and it's no longer a church and a few people still go there and there's no Bible. The Bible's in the back room, dusted off. My prayer is, God, you know what? If this is going to end up like a lot of the churches you see all on the North Shore that are dead, if this is going to end up like that, I said, Lord, before I go or before I die, let us sell it off and give it to ministries that are actually doing something, actually leaving memorials for the next generation. That's my prayer. I don't want just buildings to be sitting here for like 50 years, 100 years, or 200. I don't want that. It's useless. You're the memorial of God. Your life. We need to pass that on to the next generation. And it's not easy. It's hard. It's hard because when our kids and the next generation grow up, they get familiar. They get familiar. Like the children of Israel were so familiar with Judaism and with the scriptures that they miss Jesus. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. But you know how that happens? When it's only this. And there's no life, and there's no faith, and there's no stepping out. Don't you want to prevent the transfer problem in your life, in your kids, in this church? Don't you want to prevent that? Then you need to set up memorials in your life. And think back to what Jesus did for you. When it gets hard, when it gets difficult, when you want to give up, when you just want to make your life comfortable, when it gets hard and it's like, oh, the church thing, and I still try to do a Bible study here and there with my kids, and it's just too difficult, and I still try to pray with them, but why? They don't listen anyway. They're on their phones. You know what? You fight against all that. When it gets hard, when it gets difficult, you remember what Jesus did for you. You remember what he did for you. And he said, when you have communion, you do this in remembrance of me. You remember what I did for you as a memorial. Again, you remember what I did for you. And you know what? You suck it up and you get it together. And you do the Bible study anyway. You have the prayer time anyway. You drag them to church anyway. You do whatever it takes because it matters for the next generation if they're going to glorify Jesus. Because it only takes one generation to lose a whole nation. You got to ask yourself, between you and God, do you want to prevent the transfer problem in your home, in your life, in this church, in what you're doing? Do you want to prevent that? Then you set up those memorials in your life right now. You don't give in to the guilt. Oh, but I already screwed up. But my kids are already older. I didn't live for Jesus enough. If I just had done this. No, you forget those things and you put them behind, and now you press on. Now you make changes for Jesus. Now you let people see that your faith is alive. God's always ready to move. You just got to let him. Let's pray.